They smiled for photos under golden skies, but every bill slid across the table, straight to me. "This trip isn't about you," my mother whispered, her nails flashing as she pushed my card forward. Each swipe hollowed me out, erasing joy, turning love into a ledger. I wanted to scream, but silence felt safer. Until one night, staring at my banking app, I saw the number sink, the balance nearly gone. My hand trembled, but a seed sparked inside me. If they wanted luxury on my back, I would give them something unforgettable, and it would cost them everything. The first morning of the trip, the sun painted everything gold. Palm trees swayed behind us, and the ocean shimmered like a postcard. My mother insisted we line up for a family photo, her arm looped tightly around Ethan, her favorite. George stood beside her, awkward but smiling, as if nothing in the world was wrong. I placed myself at the edge of the frame, trying to appear as though I belonged. "Finally united, family forever," Linda captioned the photo before posting it on Facebook. The heart emoji at the end mocked me, a red blot of irony against the truth I carried inside. Behind every staged smile, there was a receipt. I had paid for the flights, the hotel, even the outfits they wore for this photograph. Each transaction had chipped away at my savings, but no one had noticed. Or maybe they had noticed and simply didn't care. To them, this was my role: provider, servant, invisible wallet. They laughed as the likes began to roll in, strangers gushing about how lucky we were to have such a close bond. My stomach twisted at the comments, each one confirming the illusion my family had carefully curated. At breakfast, when the check arrived, my mother didn't even glance at it. She slid it toward me, a casual flick of her wrist, as though I had been hired to accompany them as their personal financier. I forced a smile and reached for my card, my hand trembling just slightly. "Don't look so dramatic," Linda muttered. "It's just breakfast." She returned to laughing with Ethan, who had already begun planning his next Instagram story. My father sipped his coffee quietly, his silence loud enough to echo through my bones. Later that afternoon, I caught Linda snapping another photo. She angled the camera just right, pulling Ethan into frame while I stood a step away, waiting for her to call me closer. She didn't. I moved forward instinctively, only to realize her thumb had already tapped the shutter. When she uploaded the picture, I was cropped out entirely. The caption read, "Blessed with the best son ever." My chest tightened as though someone had wrapped it in barbed wire. Was I really invisible? That night, as we prepared for dinner, I tried to address it. "Mom," I said carefully, "I've noticed I've been covering everything. Maybe we should—" "This trip isn't about you, Rachel." She cut me off, her tone sharp enough to slice. "Stop overreacting. Can't you just enjoy the time we're having together?" Her words knocked the breath out of me. Overreacting? The receipts in my purse said otherwise. Still, I felt my face flush with shame, as though I had done something wrong by speaking up. George patted my shoulder, a weak attempt at comfort, and said, "Don't ruin your mother's mood. Let's just keep things light." His loyalty to peace over fairness stung worse than Linda's dismissal. Dinner was another performance. Candlelight, expensive wine, plates of food I barely tasted. When the server placed the bill on the table, Linda smiled sweetly and pushed it toward me without a second thought. Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair as if he had accomplished something. Later, I overheard him bragging to a couple of strangers at the bar, his voice low but smug. "Yeah, I'm the one treating the family this time. It feels good, you know, providing for them." My fork slipped from my hand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was this really happening? Not only was I paying, but Ethan was taking credit for it, stealing what little acknowledgement I might have deserved. A mix of rage and confusion bubbled inside me. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was too sensitive. That was the story my family had always told me, that I was dramatic, emotional, too much. Back in the hotel room, I scrolled through the photos my mother had uploaded. My face absent, my presence erased. The comments praised Ethan, called Linda radiant, described George as the rock of the family. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my chest. A quiet question gnawed at me in the dark. Am I imagining this? Or have I always been disposable? The room hummed with the sound of the air conditioner, but I couldn't find peace. I kept replaying Linda's words, Ethan's brag, George's silence. They danced in my head like ghosts, whispering truths I didn't want to believe. I thought of my students back home, how they looked to me for guidance, respect, even love. To them, I was someone. To my family, I was nothing more than a bank account with legs. I stared at the ceiling, my heart heavy. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe if I just endured a little longer, things would shift and someone would see me. That fragile hope flickered like a candle about to burn out. But as I drifted toward sleep, the flicker dimmed into a single cruel thought. What if they never do? The days began to blur together, a carousel of sun-drenched mornings and long, indulgent dinners. But for me, each moment came with the weight of another bill sliding across the table. Breakfast, lunch, tours, souvenir shops, every expense found its way to me. Linda had perfected her little act of patting her purse, sighing dramatically and saying, "Oh dear, I must have left my wallet in the room." George would stay quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as though silence could make him innocent. Ethan, meanwhile, laughed openly, tossing comments like, "Don't worry, Sis has us covered." Each joke cut a little deeper, reminding me of my role. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a servant disguised as family. I carried shopping bags while Linda strutted ahead, arms linked with Ethan. I booked excursions while George pretended to be confused by the technology. When they posed for photos, I often stood just outside the frame, holding their sunglasses, their souvenirs, their drinks. The tourists around us must have assumed I was staff, some kind of assistant they had hired for convenience. And maybe that wasn't far from the truth. One afternoon, as we exited yet another overpriced restaurant, I lingered behind to settle the check. My chest burned with quiet resentment as I handed over my card. When I stepped outside, a woman glanced at me with something unexpected. Sympathy. Her smile was small but warm, her eyes holding mine for a second longer than politeness required. She didn't say a word, but in that brief connection, I felt seen. It was a fragile comfort, like finding a patch of shade in a relentless desert. But shade doesn't last. That evening, Linda announced we were all going to a luxury spa. "We deserve it," she said, already giddy at the thought of mud baths and champagne. I followed them reluctantly, dread curling in my stomach. When the treatments ended, our skin glowing and robes wrapped tight, the receptionist handed Linda the bill. She didn't hesitate. She tossed it onto my lap with a careless flick. The number on the receipt nearly stopped my heart. $2,000. I stared at the figure, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. Ethan chuckled. "Well, Rachel, at least now you've invested in self-care." The words stuck in my throat. I wanted to scream, to throw the bill in their faces, but instead I reached for my card. My hand felt like stone, heavy, reluctant, but it moved anyway. The machine beeped, approving the charge. The poison was spreading, and I was the one drinking it. Later that night, I wandered past the hotel bar and froze when I heard Linda's voice. She was speaking to a group of women she'd befriended on the trip. "Rachel owes us this," she said lightly, swirling her glass of wine. "After all, what else is she good for?" Laughter bubbled around the table. My heart dropped into my stomach. The words sliced deeper than any bill ever could. They weren't just using me. They had written me off entirely. As I stood there, Ethan popped up on my phone screen. A notification, his new TikTok video. I clicked, pulse racing. He was in our suite, panning across the view, then showing Linda sipping champagne. His caption read, "Luxury trip funded by family love." Blessed. My name wasn't mentioned, my presence wasn't acknowledged. It was as though I didn't exist at all. I stumbled back to my room, my vision blurred with tears. George intercepted me in the hallway. He gave me a smile that almost fooled me, almost reminded me of the father I once trusted. "Hey, don't take things so seriously," he murmured. "Your mom just wants everyone to have a good time. Don't ruin her mood." His words, meant to soothe, became salt in the wound. He wasn't on my side. He never had been. I shut the door to my room and finally let the tears fall. My body shook with silent sobs, the kind that feel like they'll tear you apart from the inside. When I reached for my phone, I saw the notification glowing at the top of the screen. Your available balance is nearing its limit. The warning blinked, sharp and merciless. My card, my lifeline, was almost maxed out. I pressed the phone against my chest, gasping for air. Outside, laughter floated through the thin hotel walls, my family celebrating in a world where I was nothing more than an invisible sponsor. Inside, I sat alone, the realization settling like a stone. I was not their daughter, not their sister. I was their sacrifice. The night began with glittering chandeliers, polished silverware, and a menu that read more like a novel than a list of meals. Linda was glowing, draped in a silk dress Rachel had noticed still had the price tag dangling from the seam earlier that afternoon. She had paid for it, of course, just like she had paid for everything else. When the waiter approached with his practiced smile, Linda waved him over with a flourish. "We'll be a party of 6 tonight," she announced, pulling 2 acquaintances she had met at the spa into the fold as if they were lifelong friends. Rachel's chest tightened as the evening stretched on, course after course of caviar, wine, and desserts stacked higher than her patience. She barely touched her plate, her appetite lost somewhere between the laughter echoing across the table and the hollow ache inside her chest. Then, the moment came, as inevitable as the tide. The bill arrived, folded neatly inside a black leather folder. Without even looking, Linda plucked Rachel's card from her purse, Rachel's purse, and handed it over to the waiter as though it belonged to her. A switch flipped inside Rachel. She didn't protest, didn't snatch the card back, but her insides erupted with rage and humiliation. Every humiliation before this had been a slow drip of poison, but this moment was the flood. She realized with brutal clarity that she was not family in their eyes. She was a resource, an ATM with a face. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down to see a message from Ethan. "Thanks, sis. You know you'll never be Mom's favorite, right?" The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. The cruelty wasn't even subtle anymore. It was deliberate, a knife twisted with precision. She excused herself from the table, muttering something about needing the restroom, though her legs trembled with each step. In the bathroom, she stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, staring at her reflection. Mascara smudged, shoulders slumped, she barely recognized herself. "Am I invisible?" she whispered to the woman in the mirror. The silence answered. She gripped the sink until her knuckles turned white, but the fury inside her was drowned by despair. The days that followed were heavy, weighted with silence and exhaustion. Rachel stopped eating more than a few bites at each meal, pushing food around her plate while her family joked and boasted about their adventures. At night, she lay awake, eyes wide open, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter through the hotel walls. Sleep evaded her, replaced by a suffocating cycle of shame and anger. One morning, unable to stop herself, she scrolled through Facebook. Her mother's profile was a shrine to Ethan. Photo after photo of him grinning, holding cocktails, lounging poolside. The latest post showed Linda and Ethan arm in arm, smiles dazzling as if they had won some invisible award. The caption read, "Blessed with the best son ever." Rachel's chest hollowed, not a single mention of her existence, not even a passing acknowledgement that she was part of the trip. The tears came hot and fast. She slammed the phone down, pressing her palms to her face as if she could block out the world. She was fading, becoming less a person and more a shadow at the edge of their staged perfection. That evening, as she lingered in the hotel lobby trying to summon the energy to follow them to dinner, she heard a gentle voice. "Are you okay?" She turned to see a woman, perhaps a little older than herself, with kind eyes and a quiet steadiness. Her name was Anna. "I saw how they treat you," she continued softly, almost apologetically, as if acknowledging the truth might somehow break Rachel further. For a moment, Rachel wanted to collapse into Anna's arms, to pour out the years of neglect and the fresh wounds of this trip. But she only nodded, managing a weak smile. The recognition, however brief, was a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't imagining it, that someone else could see the cruelty. Later that night, alone in her room, Rachel sat with her phone in her lap. She opened her banking app, scrolling through the endless transactions. Dinners, tours, spa treatments, all bleeding her account dry. Her balance blinked in red, the numbers dangerously low. At the bottom of the screen was a button she had never dared to touch. Freeze card. Her thumb hovered over it, her breath shallow. One tap, and the charade would collapse. One tap, and she could reclaim something that had been stolen piece by piece for years. But her hand shook. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness, as the laughter of her family drifted faintly through the walls. And for the first time, the thought of ending this nightmare didn't just terrify her. It tempted her. The following morning, Rachel sat alone in the hotel cafe, stirring a cup of coffee gone cold. Her family had already left for a snorkeling excursion, leaving her behind with a casual, "You probably wouldn't enjoy it." She scrolled through her phone, aimlessly at first, until her thumb froze on a post in a familiar forum. Reddit's "Am I the Asshole?" A stranger was describing an almost identical situation. A sibling forced to bankroll a family vacation, minimized, mocked, erased from photos. The comments poured in like a flood. "You're not the asshole. They're using you. This is abuse. Get out while you can." Rachel's chest tightened. She read line after line, her vision blurring. For years, she had wondered if she was dramatic, too sensitive, overreacting as her mother so often claimed. But here, strangers validated her pain. Strangers named it abuse, financial exploitation, narcissistic family dynamics. The truth slammed into her like a wave. This wasn't her fault. It had never been her fault. She pressed her palms against her face and sobbed, the kind of guttural, shaking cry that seemed to come from a place far deeper than this trip. It was grief, yes, but also release. When the tears subsided, something unexpected began to burn in her chest. Anger. Not the self-destructive anger that ate her from the inside, but something sharper, purer, a righteous fury. They had stolen her money, her dignity, her presence, but they would not steal her will. Rachel stood, wiping her face, her reflection catching in the cafe's window. Her eyes were swollen, but there was a new hardness in them. She whispered under her breath, her lips trembling but her voice steady. "If they want a show, I'll give them one." That night, she returned to her room while the others lounged at the pool. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, and began to plan. She opened her banking app and navigated through the settings. With a few taps, she discovered new features, spending limits, transaction notifications, and the option to freeze her card instantly. She turned on alerts for every charge. The pings began almost immediately. Drinks at the bar, overpriced appetizers, a cab ride across town. Each alert fueled her determination. She grabbed her laptop and booked a flight home for 2 days earlier than planned. A one-way ticket, quiet and final. She didn't tell anyone. When the confirmation email arrived, she tucked it into a hidden folder like a secret weapon. The knowledge that she had an escape hatch steadied her pulse. Rachel's plan wasn't about screaming at them, wasn't about begging them to change. She had tried that her whole life. This was about letting their actions reveal themselves. The collapse would come, not because she yelled, but because she stopped enabling. She would remove the foundation they had built their entitlement on, her. She rehearsed it in her mind. Linda ordering lobster, Ethan smirking over cocktails, George pretending not to notice, the bill arriving, the waiter swiping, and then decline. She imagined their confusion morphing into panic, their masks crumbling in real time. A slow, almost imperceptible smile curved across her lips. But even in her newfound clarity, there were moments of hesitation. Late that night, as the hotel grew quiet, she sat in the dark with her phone glowing in her hand. The words stared back at her. Freeze card. Are you sure? Her thumb hovered over the button, trembling with both fear and anticipation. She could almost hear their voices through the walls, muffled with laughter, ignorant of the storm brewing inches from her fingertips. Rachel exhaled, long and shaky. Not yet, she thought. The moment had to be perfect, the stage set for maximum exposure. They wanted luxury. They wanted her silence. They wanted her obedience. Soon they would get something else entirely. Her hand fell to her side, but the fire in her chest didn't fade. For the first time in years, she felt something that resembled power. It pulsed beneath her skin, steady and undeniable. She wasn't ready to press the button yet, but the decision had already been made. The restaurant glittered with crystal glasses and candlelight, a cathedral of indulgence. Linda led the way, her perfume thick in the air, George at her side, Ethan swaggering with the ease of someone who had never worried about money a day in his life. Rachel trailed behind them, calm, collected, the storm inside her perfectly hidden. They were seated at a prime table overlooking the ocean, the kind of view you couldn't buy, unless, of course, you had someone like her footing the bill. Menus were scanned briefly before Linda waved her hand dismissively. "We'll take the chef's tasting menu and bring the most expensive champagne you have," Ethan added. "And oysters, lots of oysters." The waiter scribbled obediently. Rachel sipped her water quietly, her hands steady even as her heart raced. She wasn't nervous anymore. She was ready. The evening unraveled exactly as she knew it would. Laughter spilled across the table. Toasts were raised to Ethan's success, to George's wisdom, to Linda's generosity. Not a word for Rachel. She watched them eat, her mind focused not on the food, but on the inevitable moment when the illusion would collapse. When the bill finally arrived, the waiter placed it neatly between Linda and Rachel. Without hesitation, Linda slid it across to her daughter with the same entitled flick of the wrist she had used all week. But Rachel didn't move. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Linda frowned, irritated, then snatched Rachel's card from her purse herself and handed it over. Rachel's pulse quickened as the waiter walked away. She knew what was coming. A minute later, he returned, polite but stiff. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." Linda blinked, confusion flickering into outrage. "What? That's impossible. Try it again." The waiter obliged, running the card twice more. Each time, the same quiet beep. Declined. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Diners turned their heads, whispers passing between them like wildfire. Linda's cheeks flushed red, her polished composure cracking. Ethan leaned forward, smirking. "Here, let me fix this." He pulled out the supplementary card Linda had given him, sliding it toward the waiter with a cocky grin. Rachel watched in silence as the card was swiped. A beat. Another soft beep. Declined. The smirk slid from Ethan's face. The table froze. George coughed into his napkin, his eyes darting around, desperate to avoid the stares of strangers. Linda's voice rose, sharp and shrill. "This is ridiculous. There must be some mistake." But her words only drew more attention. The family that had flaunted their luxury for days now sat trapped in humiliation. Back at the hotel, matters unraveled further. The concierge approached them with an apologetic smile that barely masked his annoyance. "I'm sorry, but the room account is overdue. Until the balance is cleared, your keys will remain deactivated." He gestured toward Linda, whose face had drained of color. Rachel stood to the side, her expression calm, her body almost humming with release. The moment she had imagined so many nights was here. Linda spun toward her, eyes blazing. "What did you do?" Rachel met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Nothing," she said quietly. "I just stopped paying for my own humiliation." The words hung in the air like a verdict. For once, Linda had no immediate retort. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of Ethan's shallow breathing and George's nervous shifting. Then came the twist Rachel hadn't orchestrated, but welcomed nonetheless. Anna, the woman who had once offered her quiet sympathy, stood a few feet away with her phone in hand. She had recorded everything, the confrontation at the restaurant, the argument at the hotel desk. Rachel hadn't noticed her, but now she realized Anna had been watching, documenting. "I thought you might want this," Anna said softly, meeting Rachel's eyes. "The truth deserves to be seen." That night, Rachel lay in bed alone, the cool sheets a comfort against her overheated skin. She opened her phone and saw the notifications. Anna had uploaded the video with a caption, "When a family treats their daughter like a bank account until the account runs dry." The clip was spreading like fire. Comments piled up. "This is heartbreaking." "She deserves better." "Cut them off, Queen." Rachel scrolled, her chest rising and falling with something new, relief, vindication, the first taste of freedom. Outside her door, Linda was still raging. Ethan was sulking. George was pleading with the hotel staff. But inside Rachel's room, the world had shifted. On her screen, the view count ticked higher, faster, unstoppable. The world was watching, and for the first time, Rachel wasn't invisible. By morning, the whispers had turned into open stares. At breakfast, the other tourists avoided sitting near Linda and George. Ethan sulked in the corner, scrolling through his phone with a stormy scowl. Everyone on the tour had seen the video. Some had even shared it. The once proud Miller family who had strutted around flaunting luxury and laughing at bills were now pariahs. Conversations hushed when they entered a room. Linda, red-eyed and furious, hissed at Rachel every chance she got. "You've ruined us. You've humiliated your family." But no matter how many times she tried to twist the narrative, the video told the truth. Linda could deny it, scream, even cry, but she could not erase what the world had seen. Rachel, silent and steady, refusing to pay for her own degradation, while her mother exploded in public. George tried to smooth things over, pulling Rachel aside once. "If you would just apologize, we could recover from this," he whispered. Rachel only stared at him, realizing that for her father, appearance had always been more important than justice. The social exile was swift. The friends Linda had dragged along for dinners now kept their distance, embarrassed to be associated with her. Even the hotel staff, polite as ever, offered Rachel small nods of acknowledgement while keeping their courtesy with the others cold and clipped. That afternoon, Rachel slipped away from the chaos and walked down to the beach. The tide stretched out before her, endless and calm, the waves folding into themselves like a lullaby. She sat alone on the sand, the sunlight warming her skin. For the first time in years, her chest felt light, as if the weight pressing on her ribs had finally lifted. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply breathed. Her phone buzzed beside her. She picked it up, the screen glowing against the sunlight. The video had reached 1 million views. She stared at the number, stunned, then laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. 1 million strangers had witnessed her pain, her defiance, her truth, and instead of shame, she felt power. The next morning, Rachel wheeled her suitcase through the hotel lobby. Linda sputtered accusations, Ethan muttered insults. George shook his head in quiet disapproval. But Rachel didn't stop. She didn't turn back. At the curb, she climbed into a cab and gave the driver the name of a nearby city she had always wanted to see. Not as part of a family trip, not as a sponsor, but for herself. The city was alive in ways her heart hadn't been for years. She wandered through cobblestone streets, tasted food she actually enjoyed, lingered at art galleries, and laughed with strangers who knew nothing of her past. She snapped a photo in front of a mural. Just her, no family crowding her out. She uploaded it to her own page with a caption that read, "This trip is about me now." Within minutes, comments poured in. But they weren't the shallow, "so lucky" remarks that had decorated her mother's posts. They were raw, empathetic, filled with stories. "This happened to me with my parents too. I cut ties and it saved my life. Thank you for showing us it's okay to walk away." Thousands of voices echoing her own, proving she wasn't an anomaly. She wasn't alone. Rachel read them slowly, tears prickling her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from recognition. Every comment was a mirror reflecting the pain she had carried in silence, now validated by strangers who understood. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was part of something larger, a community of survivors, of people who had chosen to free themselves. As evening fell, she returned to the beach in the new city. The waves here sounded different, brighter, like applause instead of whispers. She sat on the sand again, but this time, the solitude didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like ownership. Her life, her choices, her freedom. She thought of the girl who had whispered, "Am I invisible?" into a hotel mirror, and she smiled. That girl had been lost, but this woman was reborn. Rachel leaned back, gazing at the stars as the tide lapped at her feet. She realized that revenge had never been the point. The freeze, the exposure, the humiliation. It was all just a step toward something greater. The true victory was not that her family had been unmasked, but that she no longer needed their mask to define her. Her phone buzzed again, another surge of comments, more strangers telling her she had given them courage. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the ocean mix with the rhythm of her own steady breath. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt whole, not a servant, not an ATM, not a scapegoat, just herself, free, seen, and unbreakable.